Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zeckthar,
And I'm Yuksen.
and we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this month we'll be discussing the backbone of the Imperium of Man, the Astra Militarum.
Indeed, and this week we'll be discussing the most famous regiment of the Astra Militarum, the Cadians.
Indeed. But I believe, anyways, you wish to discuss the Cadia in and of itself in its homeworld, yes?
Why, yes.
Good. That is where we will begin then. Tell us of Cadia, sir.
Now, not many people know this, but Cadia was originally populated by Chaos Worshippers.
Huh?
Yes, some 40 standard years before the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, Cadia was a world inhabited by a primitive race of violet-eyed humans who worshipped the four Chaos gods. Probably a remnant of mankind that had turned to the ruinous powers during the hardships of the Age of Strife.
40 years before the Horus Heresy? Well, just out of curiosity, who found them?
Your favorite Primarch, Zeckthar,
Huh?
Lorgar. You
Not him
see,
again.
after going on his pilgrimage after the Emperor censured the word bearers on Kur by destroying the capital city of Monarchia and forcing Lorgar and his entire legion to bow in his presence. Like I am fond of saying, brother, when discussing the Emperor, I am not a god, but I will use godlike powers.
Indeed. You are fond of saying that.
Yes, well, the purpose of this pilgrimage was to discover whether or not the gods once worshipped by adherents of the old faith of the word-bearer's homeworld of Kolkis actually existed. And thus Lorgar journeyed with his word-bearer's 7th company, known as the Serrated Suns, to what was then the fringes of known Imperial space as part of the 1301st Expeditionary Fleet of the Great Crusade. The Expeditionary Fleet exited the warp near the largest warp storm in the universe, later known as the Eye of Terror. The fleet's master of astropaths advised Lorgar that unusual voices in the warp were heard in the vicinity of the Great Warp Rift, voices that spoke directly to the Primarch as well, the voices of the chaos entities within the Immaterium. The decision was made to hold orbit over Cadia, and for the 1301st Fleet's elements to make planfall on the unknown world, designated as 1301-12. The landing party, led by Lorgar, was created by a large number of barbaric human tribes described as dressed in rags and wielding spears tipped with flint blades. Yet, they showed little fear. Most notable were the barbarians' purple eyes, which reflected the color of the Eye of Terror itself in the spectrum of visible light. As Lorgar walked towards the tribes, a woman emerged from the crowd and addressed the Primarch directly, calling him Lorgar Aurelian and welcoming him to Cadia. This woman, the priestess Ingethel, would ultimately lead the Primarch down a path of spiritual enlightenment that actually marked the beginning of Lorgar's fall to heresy and chaos. Later, Ingethel would lead the 1301st Fleet scout vessel Orpheo's Lament into the Eye of Terror, and thus changed the word-bearers forever, as they were exposed to the ruinous powers of chaos and slowly corrupted. The first of the legions, Astartes, to worship the chaos gods and become traitors to the Emperor. The Cadians, primitive as they were, used a language which was akin to the word-bearer's own Kolkisan tongue. Many traditions of the word-bearers were mirrored by the culture of the ancient Cadia, leading Lorgar to believe that the original settlers of both his own homeworld of Kolkis and Cadia shared a common heritage. Following the visits into the Eye of Terror, Lorgar ordered a cyclonic bombardment of the planet, wiping out the Cadians and leaving the planet abandoned, so none within the Imperium would know what had transpired there.
Ah, yes, the good old bomb your friends to keep a secret ploy.
Yes, well, following the siege of Terra that ended the Horus Heresy with Horus's death and the internment of the Emperor of Mankind in the Golden Throne, The defeated traitor legions and their allied forces among the Imperial Army and Dark Mechanicum fled from Terra. Some of the exhausted loyalists rallied and gave chase, but most remained on Terra to consolidate their great victory over the forces of chaos. Many of the surviving traitors were put to the sword, but the majority of the traitor legions escaped into the great warp rift known as the Eye of Terror in the Segmentum Obscurus, a region of space where reality and insanity of chaos collide as the raw psychic energy of the Immaterium pours into real space-time. Those same traitors who fought on Terra 10,000 standard years ago still fight today in the service of chaos. They fight against each other to prove their supremacy and against the forces of the Imperium when the warp storms calm enough to allow them to emerge into Imperial space. Because of this threat, the Imperial sectors surrounding the Eye of Terror were heavily militarized to resist these frequent invasions, and none more so than Cadia, the Imperial fortress world that stands at the very mouth of the only stable navigational route leading out of the Eye of Terror, the dreaded Cadian Gate. As a result of Abaddon the Despoiler's first Black Crusade in 781.M31, the planet's strategic location was deemed vital to the defense of the Imperium, and so, in the 32nd millennium, Imperial colonists were dispatched to resettle the world, becoming the ancestors of the present-day population of Cadians. Perhaps as a result of the Eye of Terror's proximity, this later population of Cadia also soon developed the unusual violet-colored eyes that marked the first human inhabitants of the planet. The early defenses of the newly resettled Cadia proved to be woefully inadequate. Its major cities were extremely vulnerable to enemy assaults, as they had been constructed in the traditional High Terran style, with broad ordered avenues. Following the Second Black Crusade in 597.M32, sweeping changes were carried out worldwide to improve the planet's overall defensive capabilities. The massive fortifications were constructed across the world until the planet's cities had been rebuilt into their current form. Now, if you want to know more about these earlier crusades, check out my brother's short foxes on the matter from his playlist called The Black Crusades. Anyways, Cadia stands upon the only known reliable route out of the Eye of Terror, and thus is one of the most strategically vital worlds in the entire Imperium of Man. There are other routes out of the Eye, but none are stable like the Cadian Gate, and no military force of any true size can venture forth from the Eye without first passing through it. The exact reasons for the existence of this unusual region of stability is unknown. The many magi of the Adeptus Mechanicus believe it is due to the presence of the famous Cadian pylons. These mysterious black monoliths, now known to have been created by the Necrons millions of standard years ago, to hold back the psychic influence of the warp that was so feared by the Catan masters, dots the landscape of Cadia. Their origins remained mysterious to the Imperium until the time of the 13th Black Crusade. Cadia itself was a bleak, merciless, and wind-blown planet, where only the strongest survived to adulthood, and discipline was learned from the moment a babe took his or her first steps. Cold winds howled across wide sundered plains, where armies trained with live ammunition, and every solar day not spent training was believed to be a day wasted. Every Cadian fortress city, or castle, was a massive citadel, with the streets and buildings fashioned with great tactical cunning by the finest military engineers and siege specialists of the Astra Militarum. In other words, not High Terran style. Every Cadian was taught the skills of the warrior as soon as he or she could walk, and Cadians were much sought after by commanders throughout the galaxy. Cadian military gear is considered top rate and is used as the base standard for all Astra Militarum regiments. Such a world bred hardy and determined warriors, and the Cadian shock troop regiments of the Astra Militarum have a well-deserved reputation for both honor and fighting spirit. From the earliest ages, Cadians were taught to field strip a weapon with their eyes shut, and tactical doctrine was memorized before basic literacy. As a fortress world, Cadia's entire population belonged to some branch of the Imperial military. Perhaps most famous of all are the Cadian shock troopers, regiments raised for service within the Imperial Guard. The shock troopers are considered some of the finest soldiers in the entire Imperium, even earning the respect of the legendary Adeptus Astartes. Cadians are well known for their discipline, marksmanship, and stoic sense of self-sacrifice, and are often emulated by other regiments. The Planetary Defense Force, known as the Cadian Interior Guard, was also counted among one of the best military organizations. This was because out of every 10 Cadians, regardless of their skills, was assigned to the Interior Guard, resulting in some of the best soldiers spending their entire military career on Cadia. Because of its closeness to the Eye of Terror, Cadia also maintains the Internal Guard for defense against Chaos Cult activities. A less well-known part of the Cadian military establishment, the Internal Guard consisted of Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus that had been permanently seconded to the Cadian military and made frequent use of sanctioned psychers. Cadian society was heavily militarized, with 71.75% of its total population under arms, a birth rate equal to the recruitment rate. Prior to puberty, they were said to survive on their own on the isolated islands of the Caducares Sea during the month of making, and by age 10, most could perform infantry field drills and were proficient in killing. All Cadians were to train in the defense forces, joining the youth armies, also known as the White Shields, to train alongside regular soldiers and fight mock battles with each other in the Cadian wilderness. Both men and women served within frontline roles in both mixed and single-sex regiments, with all female regiments tending to serve within the Interior Guard rather than off-world. All told, about half of all able-bodied Cadians would join the shock troop regiments and be shipped off-world to fight on distant planets, with only 1 in 1,000 ever returning to their place of birth. Cadia was under permanent martial law, leading to a number of differences when it compared to other imperial worlds. The role of planetary governor was a military one known as the Governor Primus, similarly serving as leader of the Cadian High Command. In times of emergency, when the Governor Primus was incapacitated, a special military rank of Lord Castellan of Cadia existed that by common consent could take over as commander-in-chief of the Cadian military. Also, there were no Arbites on Cadia, with the role of policing the population falling upon the Cadian Interior Guard. This martial theme extends its way into every aspect of life on Cadia. Civilian clothing incorporated camouflage patterns, available in a variety of urban and wilderness coloring, while the dwellings of both rich and poor were armored against attack. Cities on Cadia, known as casars in the local dialect, were fortresses in their own right. Each casar was protected by powerful void shields capable of withstanding days upon days of punishing orbital bombardment. They were encircled by rings of massive earthworks, studded with gun emplacements and weapons batteries, separated by an inner moat. Passage over the moat was controlled by hydraulic bascule bridges, each one guarded by a heavily armed barbican, and defended by the many armored fortifications overlooking it. Once inside, the streets of each castle were laid out in elaborate geometrical patterns, from the air resembling an intricate puzzle. Every building was constructed to act as a strong point in the city's defense. Ammunition dumps stored in the underground bunkers of bakeries, gun emplacements on public auditoriums, tab blocks with reinforced buttresses, and vision slits for windows. Living rooms which doubled as pillboxes, bastions with rooftop landing pads. Given the Cadians' mastery of urban warfare, this layout allowed them to hold each castle for months, even years, should the outer defenses fall. Tens of thousands of different criminal gangs operated throughout the densely populated castles, with ganger tattoos common amongst the troops raised from these populations. Social class on Cadia is always dictated by military rank, which in turn led to the upper echelons of command within the Cadian regiments to be highly classist. Importance being placed on being from a military family or one's bloodlines as well as military competence. The ever constant death toll from chaos incursions, combined with the limited amount of land available, led also to the implementation of the law of decipherability. Every graveyard on Cadia was maintained by local priests who routinely checked the tombstones of the honored dead for legibility. When a section of the cemetery was deemed illegible, those graves are exhumed and the bodies were added to the communal pit. Because their names were no longer known, the need to honor their memory had passed, and the space could be reused. Now, brother, we have talked a lot about how tanks are used in the Astra Militarum.
Indeed, like in the box, the heavy guns of the Astra Militarum.
Right. So, because of this, I felt it would be prudent to discuss a tank commander. And there is no better choice in my mind than Knight Commander Pask. Now, yes.
If I recall right, anyways, the last guy we talked about that ran a tank was, I think you talked about him too. He was an Ultramarine, right?
Kronos.
Yeah. So this guy,
not Master of all time.
He's not a bear, but he does kind of look like one. But
minus the red helmet.
But does this guy actually kind of measure up to Kronos?
Oh, I think he's better than Kronos.
Oh, really? Well,
yeah.
By all means, share.
Now, Knight Commander Pask is one of the Astra Militarum's most renowned tank aces, a hero of the Imperium of Man and a constant presence within the armored regiments of the Cadian shock troops. Pask is one of the most skilled tank commanders ever to grace the Lehman Russ tank. He has commanded these behemoths through hundreds of campaigns, with his reputation continuing to grow with each victory. Over the decades, Pask has commanded all variants of the Lehman Russ and has mastered them all. He knows the capabilities and limits of each and every weapons system these mighty war machines can mount, and it is a brave fool indeed who strays into his gun sights. Knight Commander Pask is Cadia's best-known tank ace, and his grizzled visage has graced propaganda bills across the Cadian Gate for solar decades. Yet is on the field of battle amid the fires of war and the snarl of engines that Pask is truly at home. Pask first came to prominence as part of the Cadian 423rd Armored Regiment when they battled against Gutkutta on the planet Sirius. Pask was assigned to the Lehman Russ battle tank Hand of Steel. The battle raged, and an orc bone cruncher.
What? I don't think we talked about that when we talked about the orcs.
Bone cruncher. Think tank with a spiky steamroller in the front of it.
Sounds orky.
Yes. In fact, the spiky steamroller is actually called a death roller.
Huh. Interesting.
Indeed. Well, eventually this bone cruncher smashed through the Imperial lines, his death roller flattening the tank's turret, and killed the Hand of Steel's commander with ease. Pask assumed command of the ruined and battered tank and turned the tank around. And with the orc bone cruncher still smashing through the Imperial line, Pask demonstrated twin talents, which would earn him his reputation. With uncanny perception, he noticed a joint on the orc machine's back armor that had been inexpertly welded together. With equally uncanny precision, he fired a pinpoint las cannon shot that hit the joint and detonated the machine's crude engines. The bone cruncher flipped over on its own death roller in a victorious blaze. The Hand of Steel, still under Pask's command, went on to rack up at least 14 confirmed armor kills, defeating Orc warlord Gutkutta's assault. The Hand was repaired and continued to serve as Pask's steed until it was finally damaged beyond repair in a battle with Elder Fire Prisms on Hater's Hole. Pask was immediately offered command of a larger, more powerful Baneblade, but he declined and chose to demonstrate his solidarity with the tankers of the 423rd by selecting another Lehman Russ and rechristened it the new Hand of Steel.
I
Since
believe that
then,
was a
he has
wise
repeated this.
decision.
What?
I said I believe that was a very wise decision, but I'll explain later. Sorry, go ahead.
Since then, he has repeated this ritual many times over, anointing a new hand each time the previous one is destroyed. Another deed that grew as legend was during the St. Celia massacres in 863.M41, when the commander and his company gained at least 4 Titan-class kills. Pask himself destroyed the feared Ravager-class Titan, Damnation Eternus, by hitting its plasma reactor with a single battle cannon shell, destroying the mighty machine in a delayed but violent explosion that lit up the sunset sky, flinging pieces of monstrous metal hard into the blood-soaked massacre's site.
Whoa. Are you saying he killed a Titan with a single shot?
The Ravager-class Titan, yes.
Oh, well, wow. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, especially if you look at the thing, which I'm
I will
sure
have
you'll have a picture of.
I will have pictures.
In 876.M41, Pask commanded the 423rd Regiment when it confronted the Adamant Fury Titan Legion that turned traitor at the St. Celia Massacre. In the largest armored battle fought by the Imperium since the Battle of Talern, the Imperium took horrific losses, but the Adamant Fury Legion was all but wiped out. Over time, Commander Pask has been given the leeway to pick his own crew members. He picks only the most educated and dedicated tank crew members with him. Only the bravest or most foolish of enemies enter the aim of the sharp-eyed commander. And whether it is his chest full of medals or his feared reputation among tank forces, both Chaos and Imperial, Commander Pask is a highly feared tank expert throughout the known galaxy. Now, Pask did not take part in defending Cadia before it was destroyed during the 13th Black Crusade, as the 423rd was traveling back from the Damocles Gulf, having aided in dealing the Tau invaders of Agrellan a decisive blow.
What? Right. Sure. That's what happened.
Sorry, how about heard about the 13th Black Crusade in Scamperdal?
Well, that would be actually a far more accurate description of what took place.
Right, well, regardless, the shame he feels at not having fought and died defending his home worlds alongside his compatriots is tempered by a cold resolve to bring ruin to the armies of Abaddon the Despoiler. Since that darkest of days, the 423rd Armored Regiment has achieved many victories, but now has to absorb depleted regiments from other worlds in order to maintain their fighting strength. They are not only the surviving Cadian regiment that has done so, as having trained various militarum regimentos across the Imperium, the Cadians are no strangers to drilling foreign troops to fight in the style of the shock troops. Still, these foreign guardsmen are not true Cadians, and there's often resentment among the proud warriors at having to formally admit lesser soldiers into their ranks. Amongst the 423rd, though, Pask quashes such imprudent notions, and those Cadians he fights with are made to understand that imperial victories are more important than insularity and nostalgic pride. Rather than petitioning new recruits for the Departamento Munitorum, however, Pask evaluates the skills of foreign tank crews he fights alongside. If a crew of Valhallan or Athonian tankers exhibits exceptional prowess in combat, they'll be requisitioned by Pask himself for service in the 423rd. Word has spread of the steel tithe, and tankers of various regiments now vie for these summons. For to fight alongside the Imperium's greatest tank commander is an honor without equal. As a result, those foreign tank crews who come to serve in the 423rd are without fail amongst the most skilled in the galaxy. However, regardless of their experience or accolades, those who are recruited in Pask's steel tithe are drilled as new recruits until they have become as tempered as any true Cadian. Well, before we get to the 13th Black Crusade and what all took place then, What do you think of Cadia before that?
A few things. Well, first off, let's talk about this Pask fella. First off, taking out a Titan with a single shot. I mean, Titan crews have problems doing that, and he was in Lehman Russ tank, so
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. Secondly, anyways, if I recall right, Valhounds are really well known for their tank and artillery regiments, aren't they?
They're well known for their armored regiments.
Right. So the concept, anyways, like, well, you're not as good as us, to me, anyways, is kind of ridiculous. Especially when you're talking about like the Valhallans.
It's kind of like how the Talons have become great tank people because they travel everywhere basically in armored vehicles.
Right.
Because too hot. Same difference with Valhalla, except for is because it's too cold.
Right. But I mean, that whole concept of like, we're better than you because we're Cadians. It's like, dude, you lost your planet. Mine's still around. I win. I do
and
find
we fought off and destroyed our invaders
multiple times. I mean, it's like complaining, especially anyways, if they were talking to like a Mordian Iron Guard guy, like, you have no room to talk to me about greatness here. But okay, I mean, we'll get back to the Cadians here in a little bit. But I find it interesting. Well, first off, anyways, what do you think Cadia looked like before Lorgar bombed it out of existence?
I bet somewhere someone went, it was a prosperous, vibrant planet.
Something along those lines. Yeah.
With waving green fields and calm skies up above.
That is one thing, though, that kind of makes me wonder, is that you said that this place, after it got bombed by cyclonic torpedoes, had islands. How?
Yeah.
Cyclonic torpedoes kind of burn everything. They kill everything. They're a planet killer. I mean, the way that, if I recall right, it is described is that it burns everything on the planet, and it gets so hot that the seas themselves boil into a mist, dissipating all water. So, how do they have islands?
Because the Emperor was so upset that he gave him lower grade.
Yeah, maybe they had little cyclonic torpedoes. Just little
or ones that only had half the power that they supposed
to. These people, by the way, the Cadians, is from before the fall of Cadia. They remind me actually a lot of their warrior society. Reminds me quite a bit actually of Spartans. No, Spartans.
Oddly enough, in my mind, kind of like, well, if you think about it, they have the same sort of mentality as the Krieg when it comes to training. From the very first, you're being trained to fight. Here.
The difference, though, is the Krieg were cloned. These people were born. So,
yeah, because they weren't on a death world.
What's that?
But yes, but they weren't on a death world.
No, but they were on a world. Cadia is constantly under attack. This is something that we kind of glossed over here, but it literally is just kind of constantly under attack because all sorts of, invaders just kind of pop out of the Cadian gate. I mean, ironically, though, a lot of the Black Crusades, a lot of them actually got around Cadia. They kind of showed up and they're just like, Cadia's like, we'll fight you. And they're like, we'll just go around you to where we want to go. Oh, we didn't think of that.
Where's our fleet? You don't have one yet.
You don't have one. We have all these people ready to fight, and they can't do anything because they can't float through space.
They didn't give us space travel. What's wrong with them?
No, I mean, they did have. I mean, one of the things, though, is that with a lot of those Black Crusades, it was they kind of go around Cadia, but once they settle into a place that they're going to attack, Cadia would normally then send their navy out. So it was always kind of like this cat and mouse game with Abaddon, where he was just kind of like, I need to take care of this, but we got to get it done anyways before the Cadian fleet shows up. So if he could get it done and then get out of there before the Cadians showed up, then he did well. And normally he did, actually. All of which anyways led up to the 13th Black Crusade.
Which made it a wonderful, strategy in itself. We'll let them pass by and do whatever damage that they want. And then try to catch.
Yeah, well, I mean,
instead of Making a barricade to make it hard for them to get out to begin with.
Well, okay, so one of the things that we didn't really talk about here, anyways, is I mean, it's not just Cadia. There's like a whole bunch, like you said, anyways. There's a whole bunch of fortress worlds that kind of surround the Eye of Terror, and I mean, he had. I mean, normally, I mean, this is one of the things I found kind of impressive about Abaddon, especially during those Black Crusades, was that he was able to actually navigate through them, or he would actually hit one of these, off-world, less strong fortress worlds so that he could get past. But that aspect of, I think the main reason why that aspect was around anyways, of we're going to wait until he attacks someplace and then we'll send the Navy, was because there was a concern that if they just sent their Navy out, it would be a trap, which kind of makes sense when you think about it, especially if you're dealing with Abaddon. It's like, oh, we got to go take him out. And the fleet all disappears to go after this chaos fleet. And either one of two things happen. Either A, they ambush that fleet, or two, anyways, they wait till they're gone, and then they hit Cadia. Which, if I recall right, kind of happened in the 13th Black Crusade. A little bit. But, I mean, by that point, though, I mean, we were talking about, like, Abaddon had mustered so many forces, it really wasn't going to matter.
Right.
But speaking of the 13th Black Crusade, I mean, we got to kind of go over it a little bit, but we did a whole Vox on it. So I'm going to be really brief about it.
Specifically on this, anyways.
On Cadia and the Black Crusade. Cadia. Yeah. I mean, I believe it is one of your favorites, Yuksen.
Yes, one of my favorites. Our Vox known as Cadia Stands, card up at the upper right corner.
Indeed. But when you're done listening to that box, you know that Cadia was lost. Dare I say, destroyed.
Yes. Pour one out for one's homies.
Indeed. Yet you, fine listeners, may wonder, why are the Cadians still around? I mean, after all, their whole planet was destroyed. Well, because of Cadia's defiance. Its neighboring worlds and star systems were defiant as well. Had Cadia not been famous for holding so long against the odds, it is likely the other planets in the system would have capitulated or given up almost immediately. No normal world could stand in the face of the horrendous, sanity-devouring armies that descended upon the Cadian Gate in such terrifying measure. However, the wider system of Cadia, Bellus Corona, and Agrippina stood fast. Perhaps, just as a veteran can lead lesser men to deeds of great heroism, Cadia had inspired those worlds around it to defend every nation and city to the last bullet. Perhaps Cadia's surviving soldiery lent strength through their hunger for retribution. Perhaps those battered by the storm simply fought for survival. Whatever the reason, the defenders of the Cadian Gate resolved to uphold the virtues of its lost linchpin world, come what may.
Regardless, it must be noted that Cadia has become a new stronghold for the forces of chaos.
Yes, yet still, Cadia remains through her soldiers. Even though their home planet was utterly sundered, the resolve of the Cadians has not been broken. Veteran survivors of the last battle for Cadia, along with regiments of their kin scattered throughout the galaxy, now fight even more doggedly against the Imperium's enemies. Whole generations of Cadian shock troops are born, raised, and trained en route to war zones, and soldiers from other worlds with the mettle to withstand Cadian training methods are inducted into their ranks. The mantra, Cadia stands, often repeated during the planet's final violent days, has gained purchase within the officer corps and amongst the platoons of the shock troops. For Cadia does indeed still stand, as long as a single Cadian soldier remains alive to fight. The sheer grit and determination with which Cadia was so well known for remains and has been even recorded within the halls of history of the Astra Militarum. Yet this means nothing to the common soldier. What really matters is the professionalism of the world's soldiers remains influential, not only as inspiration to fuel lurid trench line tales, but also through tactical concepts penned by Cadian generals that are studied in regimental academics.
Which I know you have a problem with, brother.
Yes. We will talk about that in a minute, though. But still, rare demobilized regiments of Cadians, granted rights of settlement on worlds they conquered for the Emperor, instill Cadia's legendary discipline into their new societies.
So what you're saying is, to keep Cadia alive, the Imperium has a retirement program?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's still, and regardless, Other Austrian militarum regiments model their recruitment and training practices on Cadian doctrine, or seek to equip their forces in the Cadian style. All are eager to emulate the world so heavily militarized that it was said its people were taught how to field strip and shoot a lasgun before they could even read.
Hang on half a second.
Yes?
So other worlds wish to emulate a world that not only lost, but wish to use the same strategies?
Yeah.
That's stupid. It would be much better to learn from their mistakes and better the Imperial Guard.
Yes, but
Nothing, brother. The greatest aspect of humanity is to learn from the faults of pre-generations. Yet every time the Astra Militarum can learn from past disasters, they learn nothing. Nothing.
true. But, I mean,
All that happens is more men and women die for what they think is the line that holds humanity from the brink of extinction. Yet that's not true.
okay, but
Don't you see the problem here, Zeckthar? Humanity's upper echelons can't figure out tactics or understand them. Either that or they do, and they simply don't care.
okay. So, I'm with you there. But which do you think it is? Do you think they simply don't care, or they're just too stupid to figure it out?
It depends at what level you're talking about. If you're talking
Okay.
about the bigwigs at the top, they just don't care. And probably don't understand either, but they don't care anyways.
It's just more meat for the meat grinder. I mean,
Yeah.
okay, so
They're
where
just
do you
like,
think anyways that
"Send those million over there."
so you said it depends, so where do you think anyways they just simply don't understand?
That would be areas that don't rely on being actually at the place. So logistic
What do you mean?
group,
Elaborate.
the people who decide where to send people.
You're not talking about the Departamento Minatorum, are you?
Is that which one it is? No, it's not the Unitorum. It's the one that has the impossible job.
Yeah, the Departamento Minatorum.
Those
They're the
guys
ones that are
made
supposed to
them.
try to supply everybody. So you
Uh,
think the idiocracy is with the Departamento Minatorum?
Well, there have been many cases where they just send people. They're just like, okay, we just need this many people here or there, not really establishing whether or not it even makes sense to send that particular group here or there.
So I don't
But
know
I
if that's
think part of
necessarily
that
that.
is they just don't have information.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that would be really anyways that they just can't figure out tactics. I think that's just them looking at number. It's an engineer. It's an engineer looking at numbers and not understanding really all that entitles what is those numbers. They just look
Right.
at them as like these are troops. This is how many troops we're sending. It's like, okay, what kind of troops are they? Oh, I didn't even look at that. Looks like
They don't even let us know.
Australians. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it really boils down to what you said, anyways. I think it's simply that they don't care. This comes down to if we throw enough stuff at it, it'll eventually go away.
Right.
Which to me, anyways, is just dumb.
It depends on also, like, it's more common for adaptability to actually be seen at the lower echelons, but it also depends on, like, for example, what place they come from. Like, for example, the Tanith person not only is gone a good commander in one way, but another way, even if you threw pretty much almost any sort of commander in charge of a group like that, they'd be going, okay, I need to figure out a way to keep these people alive. Or else
True, but
I won't have anybody left because there's
Right.
nobody left to grab from.
Well, here's the sad part about that, though, is that while yes, I agree, I wholeheartedly agree with you. By the way, Ibram Gaunt was probably one of my favorite guys to read about, who was a colonel in the Imperial Guard. He's the guy that ran the Tanith first and only for quite a while. I don't think he does, and later on in his career, I don't think he did, but towards the very beginning of it, and well, when he became a colonel, that became kind of a thing. But here's the sad part about what you were just saying, anyways, is that while he has a tactical mind, he liked using, anyways, his soldiers the way they were supposed to be used. If the warsmith himself, anyways, came to him and said, "You need to hold this line here," and he said, "But we'll be overrun," and the warsmith looks at him and he says, "Well, then you will die for the Imperium." Gaunt would have no choice but to line his men up to be slaughtered.
Yeah.
That's the big problem with the Imperial Guard is that there's no concept of tacticalness in the upper echelons because they don't care. It's this huge aspect, anyways, of just we're just going to steamroll our way through everything. I mean, even
something like that happen actually earlier, and when he used them, and then later he thankfully had a few good generals that were above him.
Right.
It didn't immediately just go, "We'll throw you through the meat grinder."
But I mean, it's just this has been the frustrating part, anyways, of doing the research on the Imperial Guard and running through all this for the last few weeks. Is that it just seems like they're just like, yes, the reason why the Imperium still stands is because the honor and bravery of the regular guardsmen. It's like, well, yeah, but if you use them a little bit better, you could even advance what you're doing.
Right.
And quite frankly, it's not working. If you look at it in a broad spectrum, the best they've been able to do for the last, 10,000 years is hold their own. Occasionally, you will see a crusade that kind of branches out a little bit. But after a time, anyways, that crusade, even if it's victorious, what ends up happening? Well, it gets crumbled back in until they get back to their normal territory, and then they just kind of hold their own. If they actually looked at how to use people and how to use a military, I mean, we were talking about this a couple of days ago. And if you look at it anyways from like Terran 42, they're literally stuck back in World War I with the way that they think of things, which is just so frustrating. Their military, instead of getting faster, has gotten slower. The concept of supply chain has gotten weaker. I mean, it's just instead of anyways what we see today on Terran 42. I mean, geez, it's said anyways within 24 hours. The United States military can have a supplied force, an adequate force to take over a substantial amount of ground anywhere in the world within 24 hours. Meanwhile, we've got the Astra Militarum, who doesn't even know anyways where all their weapons are.
Right.
By the way, I failed to mention this before, but Pask had a brilliant idea anyways of just staying away from that Bane blade. I'm like, no, thank you. I'll just go ahead and stick with the Lehman Russ. But it's not as big, sir. I know, but it's faster. And I can scoot around on it. And it's not a bullet magnet like those things. They're backwards thinking, quite frankly, anyways, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, anyways, has been driving me nuts. There is no outcome to this. I mean, other than doom. Eventually what's going to happen is you're going to run into a group that is superior to your numbers, and they're just going to steamroll you. I mean, a good example of that, ironically, anyways, happens to be the fall of Cadia.
Yeah. Or a lot of plants that have lost to the orcs.
Yeah.
And the Tyranids.
And the Tyranids.
Well, the Tyranids partially is because basically every single time you lose somebody, they gain something. But
right. Well, not only that, but I mean, once they're done with a planet, they pretty much just eat everything there, and then they move on. So it's, you reconquered a planet that the Tyranids conquered. Well, congratulations, you reconquered a rock. Because there's nothing else there. I mean, one of the things that I asked actually, I did a poll, and I said, which group do you think, which Xenos group do you think, anyways, will take out the Imperium? And ironically, anyways, you know what the biggest one was there?
Necrons.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about that when the first group we actually talked about was the Necrons. But it's the concept that if the Necrons actually all start to wake up, this is a force, anyways, that is superior to yours. It understands how to use tactics. And by the way, that steamroller tactic that you love to use, the Necrons can do it better. Because their people don't die. They just reborn into another machine.
There is a possibility that they will die, but
yeah, I mean, as opposed to if you shoot somebody with a gauze rifle, they're dead. There is no coming back from that. So it's just incredibly frustrating. It even infuriates me more, anyways. Whenever we talk about the High Lords of Terra, I always, anyways, get grumpy. But just reading this, anyways, makes it even more just frustrating. I mean, they're pinnacle people that they love to talk about, and they're the greatest warriors we have is the Cadians. And like you said, they lost. Yeah, these are the guys that we're going to commemorate. Now, I wouldn't have a problem with it if they said, you know what, we're going to commemorate these guys. We're going to continue using, anyways, their services, but we're going to learn what our problem was here. How come it didn't work? And then we're going to fix that.
Right.
And you can love him or hate him, but I do think, anyways, during the Indominus Crusade, Gilliman is kind of doing that. He's kind of shifting, anyways, the way people think, anyways, of the Astra Militarum. Along with, of course, anyways, his own Adeptus Astartes. But I think, anyways, that he is really trying to rip, the traditions out of the Astra Militarum and go, no, congratulations, you have done nothing in the last 10,000 years. We're going to change that. I mean, if you really want to put your hope in anything and how the Imperium might survive, it's probably Rabute Gilliman. I mean, can you
well, there's two other things. One is
okay, what?
Alvarius.
Oh, jeez.
But the other one would be
your mind is always on Alvarius, brother.
Yeah, Alvarius and Omegon, or Lionel Johnson, maybe. Very unlikely, but
okay. I will say the problem I have with the Lion is that while he's a great warrior and an amazing tactician, I don't think that he has the logistical skill sets. What's that?
The empathy.
The empathy? No. I mean, sure, that too. But I was thinking more along the lines of the logistical aspects of it.
I mean, Gilliman probably has a little bit of empathy, but
a little bit. Just a little bit. I suppose the Lion is like, no. But I could see, by the way, though, I mean, what would be perfect for the Imperium is, quite frankly, if they ended up both working together. If Gilliman ends up using a lot of his logistical skills and empirical skills to redesign the upper echelons of the Imperium while the Lion reconstructed the Astra Militarum, I mean, that, quite frankly, would be the most perfect outcome, I think.
Except for he's too busy trying to re-kill
Angron every time he pops up. The angry guy. Yeah. Well, not only that, but the other problem is that he's stuck on the other side of the Great Rift. But, okay, I think I've kind of exhausted my frustration here. Do you got anything else you want to talk about when it concerns the Cadians and just how the stupidity of the Astra Militarum? Let's just call it that. What would you like to say about that, Yuksen?
No, I think I pretty much said all I'm going to say concerning it.
Okay. Well, regardless, getting back to Cadians. The Cadians' surviving sons and daughters refuse to allow the destruction of their homeworld to keep them from unleashing the Emperor's wrath on their foes. This dauntless spirit, before we carry on, I will say this, though, about the Cadians. I have been kind of ragging on them for a while here, but one of the things that I do deeply respect about the Cadians and one of the things that I do like about them is that indomitable will. I mean, they got their planet, it was blown up. I mean, how does the saying go? Cadia fell before her people did, or something along those lines.
All right. There's a funny part about the chronicling of Krieg in one of these battle situations where they're trying to retake
Krieg or Creed? Hang on. Krieg? Krieg is in like the planet, or Creed is in like Ursukar E. Creed?
Krieg as in like the Death Corps.
Okay, gotcha.
Where they've been charged to take back a city for a particular reason. They aren't having the best time, but they're just like, we will do it! Cadia stands! And then the Krieg show up, and the Krieg just look at it and go, we have like 10 times the amount of people. You do not need to stand. We will take care of it.
Well, I mean, I will say that, like I said, that's the one thing anyways that I do deeply respect about the Cadians is their indomitable spirit and their just simple will, anyways, to fight on. And I appreciate it significantly more than even the Krieg. The Krieg, anyways, I think of just almost like mindless zombies at this point. I know you like them, Yuksen. I'm a little, I don't know, feel a little jilty when it comes to talking about the Krieg. But anyways, like I said, I have deep respects, anyways, for the Cadians on the concept, anyways, of their will and their bravery. But widespread hatred of humanity's enemies has deepened to a zealous degree. Many Cadians see their homeworlds fall as a personal failure and fight all the harder to regain what they perceive as lost honor. Some of those who are not present at the planet's tragic end, like Pask, resent those who failed in its defense but survived, or more likely, feel guilty for playing no part themselves. I think with Pask, it was more along the lines of feeling guilty for not being there. But anyways, others scorn the regiments of worlds they believe failed to aid Cadia in its darkest hour and oppose the use of soldiers from other worlds to be integrated into and expand existing Cadian shock trooper regiments, and loathe to share the burden of loss with outsiders. Oh, this is the quote. In the view of many guardsmen, the planet broke before the guard did. The sacrifice of Lord Castellan Ursika E. Creed and those under his command only reinforced for many survivors the bloody-mindedness and the hard-faced demeanor of the Austrian militarum. The men and women of the regiments of the lost Cadia will continue to wade into unremitting firestorms and battle through trenches choked with blood and mud. Alongside deafening salvos from armored behemoths, they will advance into the teeth of the enemy fire, if that is where their orders lead them, because that's what they do. They will do so again and again, continuing to fight until the day every traitor enthralled to the dark gods is defeated at last and the world avenged 1,000 times over. Well, brother, before we end tonight, I figured we'd give aspect on how Cadia died with the telling of the fall of Cadia.
A great idea, brother. And we will see you, dear listeners, on the other side.
Now, just to give you an idea, anyways, of where this is starting, and this is an excerpt, by the way, of Cadia Stands that we did last year. Was it last year or the beginning of this year?
No, it was the last
box we did last. Yeah. And this takes place after Saint Celestine has wounded Abaddon, and he teleports back to his ship, the Vengeful Spirit. As the Vengeful Spirit's teleport anchors engaged, Abaddon's quirky sense of honor was seen as he nodded respectfully to the defenders of Cadia before he teleported out. Like I mentioned before about Abaddon, he has no sense of morality, but he does have a respect for strength, and he does honor that. Although the defenders had defeated him in this battle, they had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. But they had also won. He had sought to break Cadia's spirit, sending the vanquished souls of its garrison screaming into the warp. He had not done so. When he materialized on the deck of the Vengeful Spirit, a small smile crept upon his face. With a wince of pain, he growled to himself, "Finally, an enemy worth killing." Meanwhile, back on Cadia, Creed pulled angrily away from the medic, attempting to treat his hand, blinking away after images as the implication hammered home. "I set this world's fate in motion before I even made planetfall," Abaddon had said. The Lord Castellan wished he could believe the words were mere bravado, but his heavy heart knew otherwise. Following the sudden cessation, Archmagos Call's first thought was to recheck the pylon nodal grid's function. Finding it satisfactory, he secured from war mode and took inventory of his remaining forces. Trazine slipped the Tesseract labyrinth beneath his cloak, and regretfully allowed that Ezekiel Abaddon would not grace his collection. At least, not this day. As for Celestine, the living saint stared upward, through the ruined cavern roof, and into the starlit skies above, her manner that of one who already knew what would happen next. On the surface, the thunderhawks of the Crimson Slaughter and warped dropships of the traitor legions braved the Imperial defenders' fire, retrieving whatever dark brothers and demon engines they could. Tor Garadon rallied what remained of the Imperial fists on Cadia. Scarce a score of battle brothers from the Third Company still fought, some through horrendous wounds. Of the First Company, only Sergeant Furion remained. Garadon was struck by the irony. The third had only been on phalanx because they had been considered too inexperienced to join the chapter's crusade of vengeance. Those who remained had nothing more to prove, assuming they survived what was next to come. By contrast, Marshal Almeric's Black Templars harried the retreating traitors, slaughtering the crew of one dropship before they could take flight, and bringing another 2 down with missile fire. Even discounting Almeric's efforts, not all the Black Legion arrived safely at their destination. Caught in the turbulent currents of the warp, scores were torn apart or simply scattered as molecule dust across Cadia's atmosphere. Storming to the bridge of the vengeful spirit, Abaddon nodded the silent order that sounded the knell of Cadian's doom. With a single push of a button, Cadia's fate was sealed. Deep within the will of eternity's debris cloud, warpsmiths heard Abaddon's order. All across the largest fragment of debris, a mass of ancient stone the size of a small moon, banks of plasma drives roared into life. The Blackstone Fortress corpse shuddered as engines fought to overcome the inertia of orbit. Then, slowly at first, but with ever-increasing velocity, the ungainly missile broke orbit and roared planetwards. Across the Black Fleet, plasma drives blazed as soon as the last dropships were aboard, pulling away from atmosphere at whatever speed their captains could urge. As the vengeful spirit led the exodus, Abaddon beheld the blue-gray orb of Cadia one last time and sighed in satisfaction. For 10,000 standard years, this world had been as much his foe as the warriors that garrisoned its fortresses. But nothing defied the will of chaos forever. Nothing defied his will forever. Loosing a peal of dark laughter, the despoiler decanted a draught of bulk wine into a chalice fashioned from the skull of Fabius Bile's clone of Horus, and toasted the death of one ancient foe with the remains of another. After 10,000 years, all of his planning, all of his fighting, every scrap of his being was soon able to feel the sweet sensation that he desired most of all: victory. Aboard the Phalanx, Commodore Trevu at last realized the Chaos Cruiser's purpose within the debris cloud and ordered the battle station's batteries to engage the improvised missile. But in death, the Blackstone Fortress resisted the Phalanx fire, as it failed to do in life. A section of the ramshackle drivetrain went dark beneath the bombardment, but by then Cadia's gluttonous gravity well had seized the plunging black stone. All Trevu could do was broadcast a warning to those on the planet's surface and watch in horror. Down the Blackstone wreckage plunged, its outer edge blazing red with atmospheric friction. But the will of eternity had been forged to withstand fiercer fires than any that nature could provide. Though the last of the warpsmiths perished, their hab shelters burned away by Cadia's wrath, the main body plunged on, a bolt of flaming brimstone cast from Abaddon's dark hand. All upon the planet's surface heard the Blackstone coming. Its soul-wrenching onset screeched through the quickening winds, its presence already disrupting the complex web of thermals and weather patterns across the beleaguered planet. On the continent of Cadia Tertius, half a world away from the slaughter of the Elysian fields, the defenders of scattered Imperial garrisons deemed too insignificant for Abaddon's attention, beheld the Blackstone's onset as a pinprick of fire amidst shrinking skies. At first, it was taken as a void ship's reactor going critical in outer orbit. But as the moments ticked past, the fireball became larger and larger, a massive Xenos-made asteroid plunging ever towards the planet's surface, the gravity of the world eagerly pulling the weight towards its destruction. Winds howling about it, the artificial meteor impacted Cadia. Cadia shuddered, impossible forces jarring it loose of age-old orbit. The survivors clung to the ruined fortresses of Cadia Tertius, barely had time to scream. Those beneath the vast impact site perished first. Superheated wind roared in their ears before it seared flesh from bone and reduced bone to scattered ash. The Blackstone Fortress's remnants struck, gouging a crater hundreds of miles in breadth. Mountains crumbled into dust. Seas vanished into plumes of scalding steam. Continental plates rumbled and groaned as they shifted beneath titanic forces not seen since Cadia first cooled from the star stuff of the galactic void. The tremors spread, tidal waves, and screamed particular winds their heralds. Coastal bastions that had survived bombardment and siege drowned beneath the unnatural tide, ripped from their foundations and dragged beneath squalling seas. The island of Randstorm vanished entirely. Its shell-ravaged landing fields drowned beneath the waves. 1,000 miles inland on the continent of Cadia Secundus, the enduring spires of Kasser Vark at last fell, smashed apart by waters of the Cadians Sea as the tidal shelves buckled. At the Elysian Fields, half a world away from the impact site, they heard the roar of the winds and saw the dark onrushing particle clouds that blocked out the sun. The canny sought what cover they could amongst the pylons and ruined war machines. The slow-witted perished, torn apart by the vaporizing bones of Cadia. The prayers of the Battle Sisters and Chaos Cultists alike were snatched away by the planet's dying breath, unheard by any deity or saint. In the nodal cavern, the ceiling cracked, wider yet, raining boulders down on Creed's bloody victors. The winds grew, hurling tanks across the pylon fields, crushing those who had sought shelter beneath them. Ancient pylons gave up their grasp on the bedrock, toppling like petrified trees. The pylon field's beam of dark light flickered as the monoliths fell. The retreat of the Immaterium faltered, and then slowly reversed. The storm raged for solar minutes that seemed eternities, and then fell away into hurricane winds. They blew over a world forever altered. The continent of Cadia Tartarus was gone, completely obliterated by fire and drowned beneath howling seas. The Crane Fault, bane of Cadia Tartarus since the Age of Strife, had ruptured one last fateful time, and the planetary crust split apart. Cadia Primus was half drowned, its forested mountainsides now isolated islands scattered across a new ocean. Cadia Secundus lay wreathed in fire, its continental plates sinking as the pressure of their neighbors forced them steadily inwards. None of it mattered. Cadia was already dead. But even then, the worst was yet to come. After the aftershocks of the impact rippled through the dying rock, more pylons shattered against the dust-strewn tundra. Not just at the Elysian Fields, but at the lesser sites of Kassarn, Trosk, and Vorg. As the pylons fell, the nodal web stuttered, and then withered entirely. The dark light beam, Khal's spear into the heart of the Eye of Terror, flickered once more, and then died. A new sound pealed through the howling winds. The dark laughter of gods, too long denied their prize. The crimson maelstrom of the Eye of Terror pulsed anew, and reached out to embrace sundered Cadia. Khal felt the nodal grid pull apart, the remaining pylons no match for the pressure of the resurgent Immaterium. Through his third consciousness, he dimly acknowledged the screams and the grinding of tortured rock. Then he devoted all of his attention to the task at hand. The Archmage's secondary consciousness translated the alien whisper of the pylons to a static-filled flow of lingua technis. Gaps appeared in the binary equation. Untranslatable fragments flowed with green fire. They had not been there before. Their presence confirmed the growing instability of the grid. No! He would not fail. Not after coming so close! As Khal's Tartary mind approximated translations for the unfamiliar code, his primary conscious tightened his grip, as if to hold together the grid by will alone. His optics scoured the shuttered cavern for any trace of Trazine, but the Necron, there was no sign. Curse him! And curse Veilwalker, too, for setting him on this course. Failure changed nothing. Worse, it had jeopardized the pact, the 10,000 standard year Gias, now thrown into jeopardy by perfidious Xenos. Rage overwhelmed the logic calculations of Khal's trifold mind, passionless composure, wilting beneath the realization of his folly. The pylons were not the Omnissiah's work, and yet, blinded by pride, he had sought to bind them to holy purpose. He had erred, been seduced from the precepts of Mars by vainglory. Skeins of binary code slipped into dust beneath Call's grip. Equations breathed through his mind, more alien now than recognizable. He felt the nodal grid convulse, the last binding failings away as critical pylons fell. A dark, cancerous presence flooded across Cadia's surface. Rapacious, unstoppable. As the last binaric skeins slipped free of his grip, Call finally recognized his folly. The door he had sought to close forever had swung open wider than before. Trifold mind trembled. He disengaged from the dying grid. "Cadia is lost," he breathed. Dark laughter echoed across the skies, still choked with particular matter. And yet, in that darkest hour, hope was reborn. For the restoration of the Immaterium saw also the renewed ascension of Celestine and her Gemini Superia. The light of the Emperor restored, she led the survivors out of the cavern and into the wasteland of the Elysian fields. None recognized the sight they beheld. Magma slogged its sluggish path amidst the fallen pylons, consuming the bodies of the dead and their armaments of war. Here and there across the plains, sporadic fire rang out as the first demons clawed their way onto the war-torn fields. As the scant survivors of the Elysian fields converged, drawn like flare moths to the Celestian's light, the Cadians' 8th Regiment once again looked to Creed for leadership. For the first time since he joined the White Shields so many standard years ago, none was forthcoming. The Lord Castellan looked upon the ruin of his world, his Cadia, and knew only despair. Recognizing that Creed's mind now roamed distant fields, and determined not to allow authority to fall into Celestine's dubious hands, Greyfax seized command. Using what remained of the planetary Voxnet, she issued the evacuation orders. Cadia had fallen. Even if it endured the physical trauma of the Blackstone collision, the warp would soon claim it. Victory in the Imperium's name was worth the sacrifice of thousands, of millions, but the Inquisitor knew no victory could be held here on Cadia. Thus began the last exodus of Cadia. From across the globe they came, in landing craft and transport vessels barely fit to fly. Plasma drives burning hard for the safety of the phalanx, and the ragtag fleet sheltering in its shadow. Not all came safely to their destination, though. The Cadian 27th Regiment perished to the last man as the Tetrarch Heavy Lander's pilot succumbed to warp-cast madness and plowed the limping behemoth into the remains of the Trados Mountains. Helldrakes and Harbingers, operating far from the trailing edge of the Black Fleet, risked the savage winds to spill more blood for the Dark Gods. Dogfights unfolded amongst the swirling dust storms as the last of the Imperial Fist Stormhawk interceptors sought to clear the skies. They were far too few to keep the foe contained, and the evacuation fields of Elysian became shell-ridden mausoleums. At the Elysian fields, the evacuation became a fighting retreat, every transport a target for soul-hungry demons. In the north, Celestine's Adeptus Sororitas slowly gave ground, but at a high cost to their foes. To the south, the tale was the same. The demons there were held by the ragged line of guardsmen, buttressed on either side by Garridan's Imperial Fist and the Black Templars of the Crusade. But despite their heroism, it soon became clear to Greyfax the evacuation fields would soon be overrun. Flight-worthy voidcraft were too few, and growing scarcer with each passing moment. Some would have to be sacrificed for the rest to escape. It was then that Creed at last roused himself from despair. The Lord Castellan's own would hold Cadia one last time, he decreed. They would buy the time needed with an offering of blood and bone. Orders were issued, their bleak consequence plain to all who heard, but the Cadian 8th Regiment did not blanch at the duty placed before them. There was not one amongst them who did not feel the cold hand of fear, but none broke ranks or attempted desertion. Creed was Cadia, but more than that, he was of the 8th. He had led the regiment safely through fire and death, where others had been consumed. There was not one amongst their rank who did not owe the Lord Castellan their lives, and they all accepted that the debt was finally due. As the last Imperial transports soared into the hellish skies, the 8th fought and died amongst the ruins of their world. The sisters of our martyred lady and Marshal Almeric's Black Templars were the last to depart, their bloodied survivors crowding their transports sent from the Iron Revenant to reclaim the Knights of the House Tyrannus. Greyfax departed with them, her suspicious eye ever upon Celestine. But as the landing thrusters flared, the Inquisition thought she heard a bellowing cry. Clear and proud over the howling winds and the roar of cannons, it was a deep voice, bowed by the horrors of war, but not broken, defiant to the last. Cadia stands! Creed waved his maimed hand in the air, signaling his troops and bellowing to be heard over the fury of the wind. Fall back! Fall back! With a shudder, the Cadian line shrank towards the evacuation fields. The winds rose, stirring the dust storm to new heights. Suddenly, Creed was alone. A flame-chased shadow passed overhead. The cog-toothed skull of the Adeptus Mechanicus emblazoned on its flanks. Lasfire lanced from its prow, provoking demonic screams from deeper within the storm dust. Then engines roared, and the transports thundered skyward. The last transport. Cadia was now little more than a graveyard, haunted by the stubborn and the dead. Creed stumbled. Despite the medic's valiant labors, his wounds still bled. He felt his strength ebbing as his lifeblood seeped into the greatcoat's fabric. One last effort. Then he'd rest. One last effort. The storm parted, not before a demon, but a metal giant in scaled cloak. The wind snatched away Creed's hurried shot. Light glittered upon the figure's upraised palm. Iridescent polygons, billowing in a hypnotic dance.
Versakar E. Creed.
The giant's words slammed down like tombstones.
This need not be your end. Eternity awaits.
The giant's laughter followed Creed into darkness.
Well, folks, that's about it. With Cadia's destruction, Abaddon finally got the victory that he needed, and is now in the second phase of his plan, marching on Terra.
And on that bleak note, we are out of time. Sorry, we did actually go a little bit longer this week, folks, but we were talking about Cadia. And I hope you enjoyed this, so much so that you will come back next week and listen to us as we talk about the Commissars, the 10th first and only. And what was the Commissars? They've got a regiment too. The Barracks?
Maybe?
We'll go with the Barracks this week. I might be wrong, but we'll see.
Parax, maybe?
Maybe.
But regardless, can't wait to talk about them. But if you're still listening to this, then if you could be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button. And if you wish to help us expand our work on 40k lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashiraka.
Indeed. Have a great day. And as always,
Until next time, this is Zeckthar,
And Yuksen.
signing off.